Hi. So I'm back. Um, don't know if you noticed that, but I kind of drift in and out. I'm not a real YouTuber or whatever it is. I'm real fucking old is what it is. Sorry. Just, it's the way it goes. In any case, I just wanted to point out something that needed to be pointed out. So I'm doing it. Something I don't think people truly realize, but that was highlighted for me just a little while ago, and that is ultimately responsible for making me make this video. Um, is that there are two very, very different histories of trans people in the United States. I can't really speak to it in terms of outside the United States, and anybody who knows my writing in general or most of what I do knows that I try to keep it just within the United States because it's really, really rude, and more importantly, it's ethnocentric to shift your understanding outside the particular region with which you are culturally aligned, so to speak. Um, so there are two separate cultural histories within the trans community. And if you don't realize that, if you don't think there are, if you aren't aware of that fact, you're missing a really important thing, and ultimately you will make a serious mistake. You just absolutely will. There's no way to get around it. Um, the division of those histories is marked by two factors. The first factor, and the most important one, is actually race. The second factor is economics. Money, to be perfectly blunt. I mean, it doesn't get any simpler than that. It doesn't get any more realistic than that. That's just the way it is. It's the way it works sometimes. So that is really important to understand, especially when you realize that the modern trans community, the way we understand transness today and the basis and the structures that led to the definitions and descriptions and all that other crap that we use today, it goes back only as far back as about the mid 1800s. Call it 1855, 1860, 1865 time. And within the United States, the full awareness, the real understanding, doesn't really start until 1910, 1915, 1920, in that time period. From as early as the 1920s, though, the, the cultural history of trans people in the United States has been marked by two very different paths because of those complex issues of race and money and how they collide. And if you don't realize that race and money collide, well, now you've got more work to do and more understanding to reach. These two divergent lines are very much distinct from one another. They are not the same. Um, and this might strike a lot of people as odd because they're separate, they're parallel, so to speak. Even though each does influence the other, they're still very much distinct, and particularly in the way that the ideas move across from one to the other. Um, a good example of this is passing, which anybody who's ever read me knows that there's a lot of very deeply problematic issues with the concept of passing that are ultimately destructive to trans people and to the trans community as a whole. Um, this still goes on today with two different tracks. And the same forces are in place and in play, and it will be at least 20 years before they converge again. And that's actually assuming that people are aware that there's two tracks and that they take the time to understand the two different ways that those things go together. That's unimaginably important. That's really key, and a lot of people don't get that. It is important for trans folk to be aware that this history exists and what this history is, because the poor side is essentially the side of persons of color who have a whole host of things that started there and then filtered up and out, brought primarily by white folks who started poor and turned things around, leaving their brothers and sisters in their pasts. These things are not separated. And when I say that, I mean that all of this together. You can't separate the race issue and the money issue. They aren't distinct. They are combined. They're very much one thing. And if your history doesn't know this separation, then it isn't a full history. It is a partial one that lacks nuance, one that lacks depth, one that lacks accuracy. And history, without those things, has a name. And that's your homework. Look that name up. And once you do, you'll realize just how big a mistake you can make. To give you an idea, that would be like saying that the history of the United States of America is the history of white people. That's what you're facing. Don't make that mistake. That's all. I'll see you later. You be good. You be careful. Ah, hell, just behave.